of Decatorish.com. Welcome. Today is June 3rd, day before my 39th birthday. So, pretty interesting time to be almost 40 in America. With me are my contributors Hans Utz and George Chidi. And George Chidi is getting some stellar service from the CVS in downtown Atlanta right now. So, we want to give a special shout out to them. We're gonna get underway in just a bit. I'm gonna because we're a little bit ahead of our start time. It's 6 p. It's 5:58. We typically start the show at 6. I'm gonna make sure that we are posted online and all that, and so people know when we're doing stuff. Just what in the world? Oh, huh. My Twitch show just started on my phone. That's weird. Anyway, I wanted to just get a sense from George about how things are going downtown. Hans is going to talk to us about his recent testing experience with COVID, and I'm going to talk about the news. And hopefully, it'll be a little bit. Lord, I don't want to watch this. I don't want to watch my own Twitch show. I keep hearing myself come out of my phone, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? It's like my phone is set up to do Twitch. I'm about to turn this phone off. I don't know what's going on. George has got his headphones. Moment of truth. Do a little drum roll.
I've never used these before or anything like them.
We're all learning all kinds of new stuff right now. It's fine.
Gadzooks. All right, Bluetooth.
Did you just say Gadzooks?
Gadzooks.
I said Gadzooks.
Gadzooks, Sarge.
As an underused word, it should move back into the lexicon.
So if you're watching us right now and you want to comment, you're gonna need to create a Twitch account for sure. And if you're gonna go to the trouble of creating a Twitch account, please give us a follow. We're trying to get up to 50 followers right now. I think we are currently at 27, which is cool. But we get some kind of status when we are up to. Oh, we got another follower. Thank you. There are viewers. Hey, 7 viewers. So for those of you just tuning in, we have Hans Utz and George Chidi. Both are gonna. Hey, Vesmuth, it's good to see you. Both of them are gonna tune in, and join us today. While George is getting set up, Hans, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience? Because you recently went and got a COVID test. So tell us. About what that was like and what you found out.
Yeah. So last week, it was Friday. DeKalb County, where I'm a resident, has been pushing lately with a lot of communications on, regardless of whether you have symptoms or not, come get tested. We want, one and all, we want everybody to get tested. So I thought, sure, I'll do my duty and go get tested. I didn't have any particular symptoms, and it actually was the experience between what I expected and what it was there's a pretty big chasm. I was expecting lack of organization and wait times, like the historical DMV situation, but it wasn't like that at all. It was really easy to sign up online, got a time slot, drove to the location. There wasn't any waiting. They knew what they were doing. It was organized, and as fun as having a 7-foot stick shoved up your nose is a pleasant experience. It was actually really well done. I've seen a lot of stuff out there about how awful the test is, and it's not fun. I think you had one today, right, Dan? So,
I did, but I'm going to let you finish your story before I tell people about my experience.
Yeah, it's not awesome to have a stick pushed up that far, but it's not it's not the end of the world either. I equated it to a really stiff bite of wasabi or something like that, where it makes the
Yeah.
back of your head, kind of like I presumably that's because the back of your sinuses are what's reacting to the wasabi, and when somebody hits the back of them with a swab, it's the same feeling. So, I mean, my eyes watered for a little bit, but it wasn't that bad. What was bad was getting a positive result.
Yeah.
So I'm actually sequestered right now.
In the TARDIS.
In the TARDIS, yes. So this is like the best isolation chamber in the known universe, but across multiple time dimensions apparently. But yeah. So the thing that's actually it's extremely surprising because I didn't have any symptoms. Did it just because I was trying to do my duty.
Sure.
And I still don't have any symptoms, right? I'm stuck in a 150 square foot bedroom, basically, for 14 days, feeling fine.
I can't help you. Good luck.
So I guess the moral of the story is, even if you are feeling fine, even if you don't feel like you have any symptoms, listen to what the Department of Health is saying. Go out and get tested. It's important to, not for me so much. I mean, I feel perfectly fine.
Right.
But the last thing I want to do is give it to somebody.
It stays that way.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
But yeah, I mean, I would have been giving it to people without knowing.
Right.
If I hadn't.
So if you're just tuning in, I'm sitting here with my contributors, Hans Utz and George Chidi. Hans is in the TARDIS. He has sequestered himself because he recently received a positive COVID test, even though he was asymptomatic. He went and got a test to do his civic duty, and now he knows. So we're glad that he got tested. We certainly hope it never develops into anything full blown. George Chidi's with us. He just put on his mask. He just got some headphones. And you're ready to chat too, right, George?
I think so. Can you hear me? Am I okay?
I can hear you just fine, and that
can.
mask is awesome. So,
fabulous.
Yeah, great. You sound and look good. So after Hans got his COVID diagnosis, I went and had my test done today. I scheduled it. It was very easy. I went to the DeKalb County Public Health website, and in full disclosure, the DeKalb County Board of Health is a sponsor of Decatur-ish now. So they're going to be advertising some of their testing initiatives and all that, which is great. I'm 100% behind that. It was easy. I went and got on their website. I picked the time. I got a QR code. I went to Rehoboth and Tucker. They scraped the back of my throat with the swab or whatever. Hans, it's a good description of it. It's like wasabi.
Yeah.
It's like just in the back here. And so I'm gonna get the. How long did it take you to get your test results?
Well, so I did it at like 5 p.m. on Friday, and so it was I think Tuesday when my results came back. But it wouldn't that would have been a 2-day turnaround had it been middle of the week. Yeah.
So Vesmuth asks, do they recommend a retest to validate a positive result, or do they just say 14 days of hiding out?
That's a great question. So the test does not have a very high false positive rate. It can have a kind of high false negative rate, meaning that if you get a negative, it doesn't actually mean that you don't have it. It just means that they can't detect it in you. But the false positives it's a really low rate. And so I haven't gone back and gotten retested. I am just assuming that I have it. Rather than use a test to confirm, use a test that someone else would be taking to confirm, I'm going to go ahead and honor the quarantine and go for the 14 days.
Yeah, just safe. Now, is your wife or any other members of your family going to get tested as well? Or no?
Yeah, they went today. They went today to go get tested, and so we'll find out whether I'm going to be sequestered by myself for 14 days or whether we're just going to all be in the house together.
Well, I hate that for you, but I'm also glad that you're asymptomatic and that you went and had that done. And I was going to encourage people to do this anyway, but since the DeKalb Board of Public Health is a sponsor, Google the DeKalb Board of Public Health if you live in DeKalb County, and please sign yourself up. The testing is free. The time to take the test is plentiful. There are a lot of times available. It's quick. I was in and out of there in 5 minutes, and it's good to know your status. It's good to know what's going on. It helps people contact trace and do all kinds of other important things that we need to do right now. So I appreciate Hans sharing that story with us. And now that George is all set up, so let's talk to George for a little bit. So George, tell me where you are right now and what is going on.
Well, as you can probably see, I'm standing in the middle of Centennial Olympic Park Drive,
Okay.
and I am in the middle of the protest. It's kind of chill right now because we're still 3 hours before curfew.
Right.
And because we're 3 hours before curfew, there isn't a really good reason to believe that we'll get disrupted unless somebody really starts trying to do something stupid.
Gotcha.
So it's a little loud. I just want to make sure that you can hear me.
You're kind of muffled. I can hear you, but you could be a little louder.
Okay, so because it's loud.
Yeah.
There's some chanting going on behind me.
Gotcha.
Things to think about as I'm looking around. It's multiracial, probably about 50-50, black and white, which is interesting because that's also the composition of the city of Atlanta. I think this is relatively reflective of young Atlanta. One of the things I'm trying to figure out as I'm out here is what people actually want to accomplish through this protest. Like, because it's one thing to say we want justice for George Floyd, everybody does. It's another thing to say, okay, well, let's say we get that. Let's say, all right, there's been an arrest, there are charges. What happens next? And so as I'm out here, I'm going to be talking to people about it.
Gotcha. And if you're just tuning in, our guests right now are Hans Utz and George Chidi. Both are contributors to Decatorish. George is currently writing the George on Georgia column, where he talks about pretty much whatever the hell he wants to talk about. People read it, so we're more than happy to let George do his thing. If you are watching us, but you want to chat and ask some questions, you're going to need to create a Twitch account, so go ahead and do that. And if you have a Twitch account and you're watching us, please give us a follow. We are trying to get up to 50 follows. And cool things, apparently magical internet money will rain down or something when we get 50 follows or something like that. But that's what we're going to try to do. We're at 27, so hope we pick up a few more today. George, I wanted to touch on some things. Hey! Another follower. I wanted to touch on some things, George, that you brought up last night that I thought were really interesting, and I don't want to make you repeat yourself, but I liked what you were saying about how this is really kind of following this trend of the left having leaderless movements, something kind of a holdover from Occupy, and it hasn't really changed all that much, and you were talking about why that is, and if you just want to give us the Cliff's Notes version of that, I think people would find it interesting.
So one of the reasons why we've had a leaderless movement this far is because typically one of two things happens in a movement where, like, you have an identified leader who's calling the shots. Either, and I'm gonna take this mask off for a second just so I can speak clearly. Like, one of two things happens. Either you end up being co-opted, or you end up getting arrested.
Right.
Like, that's the problem. Like, half the streets downtown are named for civil rights leaders who some people in this crowd would say had sold out. That they had made compromises that ultimately didn't complete the mission, and so we're out here because they were unable to get all the way into equality and equity. The other thing, though, and it was the thing that everybody was worried about during the Occupy movement, was, okay, so that guy's in charge, and suddenly the cops keep arresting him over and over and over and over again. And there were some people that were associated with leadership during Occupy here in Atlanta, and they got arrested a dozen times. Tim Franzen, was famous, like for white guy, a red beanie cap, and there, like 3 years later, like he would get stopped at random by cops for traffic stops. Like he was being followed at one point. This, like, in part because Mayor Reed was kind of a jerk. It shouldn't shock anybody that Mayor Reed would take things personally.
I should disclose that Hans Utz actually worked directly for Mayor Kasim Reed as the deputy COO, and you can see him smirking. But just some context.
I'm hardly unaware of his reputation, haven't seen it firsthand. Let me just say it that way.
Yeah, the mayor was very good at taking things personally. He's a screamer. The way I think of Mayor Reed is the way I think about the guy who was playing the movie executive in Tropic Thunder, like Tom Cruise playing the music executive, where he just scream at people like. I've seen Mayor Reed actually melt down like that in public. I think it was something to watch.
Yeah.
So leaderless organization, like there's nobody out here who is calling the shots per se, which is good if you're trying to not get arrested for calling the shots, and it's bad if you're trying to actually get people to do something specific at any given moment. And that's the problem with that. Like, we got probably 2,000 people here now. There may be as many as 10,000 coming in another 3 hours. And we don't know what they want, not specifically. We have lots of ideas, but nothing concrete because there's nobody who has the moral authority to articulate.
Let me ask George, how much do you think as well the leaderlessness of it is related to the fact that there isn't any one up the ranks politically to hand those demands off to, right? I mean, we're talking about a fundamentally progressive set of demands, and historically there hasn't been a recipient at a national level to enact progressive progressive laws or progressive legislation in effect.
So the irony is, I actually think there are people right now that we can handle instead of demands to. Like Nancy Pelosi is running the House of Representatives right now. We control like one half of one branch of government in the sense that Democrats have a place to start a conversation. Right. The problem then is that I don't think that I think she's trying to be in the middle of her coalition, which means she's not as progressive as a lot of people in these streets would want her to be. And two, honest to God, let's say you get something passed with Congress and in the House, and you're trying to get something through the Senate. You still have this garbage in the United States Senate, and what do you do? You're right. Like it's not like there's enough progressive governance out there where you can get legislation passed. But that's not necessarily the only center of power. Corporate America has a lot of power, and corporate America responds to financial incentives and market incentives. There's a way of getting it done. The courts, whatever else is going on, like are a center of power. And even though there have been a lot of conservative appointments, at the end of the day, like the right argument in the right courtroom might actually move the legal needle in ways that would be useful. I don't know what to do about Donald Trump. I don't know what to say about Donald Trump, except I want him to get the hell out of office. But suppose this protest moves Joe Biden just that much more to the left, or opens him up to prioritizing these needs in ways that he would not have otherwise done.
Yeah.
Like if this changes the way Joe Biden tries to campaign, I would call the protest a success.
I mean, I think it's safe to say that we're at a point where there needs to be some kind of national standard around policing and around what the particular parameters that the departments adopt. I mean, it's no accident that you see a very different outcome on the streets of cities that actually socioeconomically look similar, right? And in the philosophy that the departments take and the approach that the departments take lead to extraordinarily different outcomes on the street. And you've even mentioned some of that about, you know, APD. I mean, APD is not perfect by a large margin, right? Even the chief has said that. But compared to Minneapolis, compared to Chicago, you know, this is actually a well-trained department. And
I completely agree with you.
yeah,
I actually think a lot of the people out in this street would agree with you as well.
Yeah, yeah, and you see the different outcomes from that. I have here, Dan, if you let me kind of bring some of these points up, I'd love to get George's reaction to them. But the NAACP released a list of demands that they want to see, right?
Okay, yeah,
and
we'll do that, and then after that, we have a reader question I want to get to as well.
Okay, so here's the list of 4 demands, and I think they're very, very straightforward. The first one is a ban on the use of knee holds and chokeholds as an acceptable practice for police officers. I don't see that as even remotely controversial. That it's just an unnecessary use of force. And speaking of use of force, the second demand is that there is a use of force continuum for any police department in the country that ensures that there are at least 6 levels of steps with clear rules on escalation. What I find so interesting is that our soldiers and Marines actually have a more sophisticated use of force for, you know, engagements on a battlefield than our police do dealing with citizens. The third one is that the Open Records Act must ensure officers' misconduct information and disciplinary histories are not shielded from the public. And then ultimately, implementation of citizen review boards that have legal authority over some of the departments that they investigate.
So it's the last one. It's the last one where that might be the hill that some departments die. Because I think personally it probably just
George, we're having trouble hearing you, sir.
Oh, sorry about that. Hang on.
The last one.
We're still there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
there
can
you
much
go.
better. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Okay, good. So, let's start with this. Like, I think that the last thing on that list, the civilian review boards, is going to be the hill that a lot of departments die on.
Yeah.
Because the first 2 are gimmies. Like, nobody wants a chokehold. Nobody wants to legitimize a chokehold. Like, they're even. The idea of having a database to track bad cops, basically, in a digital age where we've got information 8 ways to Sunday, is it's also kind of a gimme.
Yeah.
But I was talking today with elected officials at the municipal level, like, who are telling me that their staff will fight a civilian review board even now, even in the middle of all of this. And it's because it surrenders a degree of control that they would find unacceptable, that they might find the standards applied by a civilian review board to be mercurial, that the appointments on a civilian review board become political. These are their objections. I don't necessarily hold to them. I'm just telling you what they're going to say. Like, and personally, I think that's just the start of a conversation.
Yep.
Like, okay, well, how do you depoliticize those civilian review boards? How do you establish a set of standards that those review boards use to determine whether or not use of force has been appropriate or not? You know, and on and on and on. I mean, it's like you could get there, but you actually have to do the work.
It's a great segue into the question that our reader had. And George, you posted about this on Facebook earlier. Vesma says, don't want to derail the current thought, but at some point, curious for y'all's thoughts about the AJC report on the police chief's claim that the charges against the two terminated officers are politically motivated. And I know George has some
Yes.
thoughts about that. I do. Hans probably does as well. But I'll let George go first.
Yeah, I think they're like so. I know the chief. I like the chief, and I agree with her in this case. Like, I absolutely think that doesn't necessarily mean that the charges are wrong. Like, I want to make that clear. I don't like. I think it is reasonable to lay some criminal charges out. Maybe not the ones that they've been charged with. Um, but the timing is deeply suspicious. Like, to suggest that a proper investigation can happen in 24 hours for a charge like that to be laid, given the conditions, is surprising, even with body cameras going. Um, I think it's clear that the officers involved needed to be fired because they lied. If you lie in the middle of an investigation into your activities, you're fired. You're fired, and there are like no question marks. But the DA is like 6 days from losing his seat. Like, Paul Howard is under investigation for having misappropriated $250,000 of his department's money, funneling it into a charity that he controls. And he's got a bunch of allegations of sexual misconduct and harassment. And he's got a very strong primary challenger like Fannie Willis. Um, so this, to me, looks like a Hail Mary in the middle of all of this to say, you should keep me because I'll prosecute cops. Hey, look at this. Like,
I mean,
you can't tell me that those charges couldn't have been laid out in a week or two.
Right.
And there were consequences to having made that charge today, because I was on a conference call with municipal leaders today where they said that they were pulling their SWAT teams out of downtown Atlanta because they were afraid of being prosecuted.
I mean, not just that. If you rush an investigation and slap together some charges, you dramatically reduce the chance that you're actually going to hold the cops accountable, right? And so,
Right.
so if it is something that they did wrong that's worth charging, and looking at the video, it's 100% worth an investigation to determine that. There's no way that was determined in 24 hours, and not with the kind of charges that were filed either. And so it's the cops are going to get off on these charges because
Yep.
it was
And they're going to be all
rushed.
pissed off again.
Yep, it was rushed. It wasn't done well. I mean, it's just really thrown together in time for the election. It's pretty infuriating because it's in some ways the worst outcome, right? Like, if you want the officers to be held accountable, then you wanted a proper investigation to be done so that it could be determined whether or not those charges would hold up, and then that they would actually end up being successfully prosecuted. And instead, what we have is other police departments pulling out. The cops are going to get off anyway because it was rushed, and it was all done to save a political career. It's pretty infuriating, I think.
Yeah.
So the question for me is it obvious enough? Like, are people going to look at that and go, oh, well, of course that's what he was doing? Or not? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, Paul Howard sounds crooked as a stick. So this could definitely be, an attempt to bolster his campaign. I was genuinely surprised that there were any charges at all, much less the charges that were delivered so quickly. So that is, yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page. We don't have another reader question, but I did want to read a special reader email that I got. Um, the author is called States' Rights Now, and I published an editorial saying that now is the time to remove the Decatur Monument in the Decatur Square. And the reason I said that is because I don't honestly believe that the state is going to try to enforce its own law against removing monuments in the current political climate. So if you're going to do it, now's a real good time. It's better than waiting 6 months when all this has died down. But state rights now says Your article about the monument is exactly what I would expect from you. History is not exactly a strong suit amongst social justice warriors, liberals, Democrats, and Marxists. You can't prove the monument is about white supremacy any more than you can prove General Nathan Bedford Forrest was a member of the Klan. I believe he started the
Oh,
Klan.
lovely.
Yeah. The Confederate monument destroyers never intended to stop at the low hanging fruit. It is now on to all veteran monuments. It is an anti American amusement. Well, states' rights now, screw you. I don't really care what you think. But I'm glad you got your email read on the Twitch show. If anybody else would like to extend some, thoughts towards states' rights now, feel free.
Let me make this really clear. I am a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. I do not want to see veterans monuments coming down, but I will take a sledgehammer and smash that CSA monument into small little bits. Right? That is a traitorous cause against my military, against my country. I don't see any reason why we're trying to celebrate a bunch of freaking traitors. So yeah, smash the crap out of that monument and tear it down. You'll be doing us veterans a favor.
Fun fact: George and Hans are both veterans, and we appreciate your service first of all. And
Uh,
but it's really cool to have two people in this discussion who have that experience. Which is a segue into another question I had: is what do you think about President Trump getting on TV the other day and saying he was going to direct the military into our cities to crack down on these on Antifa or whatever the hell he's cracking down on. I'll just let you dunk on that for a few minutes.
yeah, let me go on this because, like, the misuse of the army and the military has been driving me nuts since like the day after Donald Trump was inaugurated. The I'm like there are 100 different things I'm pissed off at about Donald Trump and the way his pardons of people who had committed serious war crimes, undermining our legitimacy as a military enterprise. Um, the way he's been firing military leaders who speak against him, like firing the captain of I can't believe. I mean, the fact that you can say that he fired the captain of an aircraft carrier who was concerned about his crew getting coronavirus. I so the idea that he wants to, like, it has been this step by step degradation of our standards for the separation between the military and politics, and our tacit acceptance of the military as an arm of a fascist government, frankly. Because if you believe that Antifa is a terrorist organization, then you are suggesting that the United States government is fascist by definition. And like when you pair that with rolling a bunch of, soldiers with insufficient training for handling a crowd like this into cities, you are asking them to eventually shoot the people that I'm looking at. And it's why I need everybody in America to be in the street right now, because short of that, it looks like we're afraid of our own army. And what I want is an army that's afraid of its own public so that they won't shoot people. I think that's the only thing that gets us over here.
When you watch what Trump did in order to get a photo shoot, where he deployed force against peaceful protesters exercising their constitutional right, no rioters, no looting, nothing that could even remotely be considered criminal, a bunch of people doing precisely what the Bill of Rights permits. He uses force against them, rubber bullets and tear gas, in order to disperse them so that he can have a photo shoot. Good Lord, don't talk to me about deploying the military, Trump. You have no idea what it's for.
He also had bone spurs. Did he have bone spurs? Was that something was that him?
He bought his way out of it.
Oh,
Who
yeah.
cares?
Like
that's, he had a coward's heart is what he had. Doesn't really matter how it manifested itself.
He seems like he talks pretty brave. I don't know. Was he in a bunker? Was he doing that this weekend? Was he hiding? I think he was hiding.
He was just inspecting it.
He was inspect. Okay, he was inspect. I got it. I got it. Well, I will tell you this. I protested the Iraq War. Way, way, way back when, for all the good it did. And my heart is definitely in the streets where you are right now, and I wasn't really feeling it as much. I mean, I definitely sympathize, but after he started talking about putting the military in the streets on this stuff, you know, I agree with George. More of us need to be out there. I hope I'm doing my part by broadcasting it and letting people know what's going on. But yeah, it's getting to the point where I'm about to take the headset off and go. Because I'm sick of this too. And that's just not what our military's for. Now I'm reading some articles online that the Pentagon people are trying to backtrack a little bit and say, no, we didn't really mean that. We didn't know what he was doing. I love how whenever Trump does something like this, there's always some article in the New York Times or the WAPO where it's a bunch of anonymous people like rats from a sinking ship going, oh, we didn't know about this. We didn't take any responsibility for it. I read somewhere that the military is maybe being pulled out of D.C., so maybe he has thought better of all this, but that's a real scary moment for this country. I was watching it on TV, and I watched them fire tear gas at peaceful protesters so Donald Trump could give a speech and go take a photo. I don't even know what to say about that. That's the most weird thing I've ever seen in my life. Disturbing. Disturbing. I mean, not as disturbing as what happened to George Floyd, but it's like in a top five somewhere. And I actually finally, believe it or not, I finally sat down and watched the whole George Floyd video. Specifically, I watched the New York Times reconstruction of it, and I hope the people that filmed it are okay, because it was very traumatic just watching it as a spectator. I can't imagine how it was for the people who filmed it and were begging the police officers to stop killing this man right in front of them. They
Yeah.
were murdering someone right in front of them in broad daylight. Um, you know, anybody who doesn't understand why people are out in the street with Georges right now, you need to take a minute to go watch that video if you haven't watched it yet. Because they murdered somebody in broad daylight, and they almost got away with it. Were it not for the outrage and what's going on right now, they would have gotten away with murdering this individual. So, yeah, I encourage everybody to take time out to watch that. To everybody who's joining us, we have a good viewership today, so that's good. We got about 14 people. If you like us, give us a follow, create a Twitch account so you can comment and ask some questions. Share the Twitch show with other people. If you think, okay, so we got a question from Vesmith. I want to know where the F is Congress right now. Like, A, why aren't more of them out there in a visible way? That's a great question. And B, the number of Republicans who claim not to know, not to have seen, not to have an opinion of the stuff at that church is unbelievable. I think question A is one we should talk about for sure, which is where are our public officials? I was having this chat on Slack with some friends today. They're like, why aren't the Democratic Senate candidates saying anything? And the truth of the matter is they are. I'm getting press releases from them every day. But it's so hard for them to break through the noise right now because they're not out there where George is doing what George is doing, which is leading, which is marching. And I wanted to get George kind of get your opinion on that. Where are our elected officials on this? Why aren't they out there with you right now? Is it because they're scared of COVID? They're scared of getting punched in the head? What's going on?
So I think some of this is because they don't want to be associated with radical politics. Like flat out. Like they're not this looks politically radical. People who get elected to public office tend to be very risk averse. And if you're risk averse, you don't want to be in a place where you can't control the message, and that's right here. Like nobody is in control of this message, so they're staying away. Just in case somebody says or done something really stupid, they don't want to be here so that they'll have to disassociate themselves from it. Like it's sad, but that's American politics now.
So have you seen any elected officials out there? The only elected official I have seen so far was Ann Lerner, who's a city council member in Tucker, and she was at the
Yeah.
Tucker event. But as far as I know, like I haven't seen any other elected officials. I'm waiting for. We covered a small protest in Decatur today, which getting back to that whole point about leaderless movements. Somebody organized a protest in Decatur today, and nobody knew who the hell they were. Nobody knew who was behind it until they got
Yeah.
to the protest, and thankfully it was somebody who meant well. It
High
wasn't a
school students.
provocateur.
Yeah.
But I don't know if any elected officials were at that today. But have you seen any elected officials out on the streets where you are?
So generally, I would recognize them, but no. Short answer is no. I haven't seen any.
Is not wanting to see people murdered in broad daylight really that radical?
You would think.
I mean, what's going on, George? What are you seeing where you're at?
Can you hear me?
I
Yes.
can hear you. I was asking what's going on around you. If you could tell us.
Right. All right. Good. So right now, I want to say about 500 people, give or take, are standing at the police line, and there's a group of police officers who are sort of facing off with them. And I'm going to see if I can give you an image of that.
Yeah.
So here, take a look.
Okay.
So it's not actually like overwhelming force in front of us. There are only about, if I had to guess, maybe 30 cops. Behind them are maybe a half a dozen armored vehicles. Oh, excuse me, sorry. And behind them, though, are looks like an armored personnel carrier. But there's actually, and I think it's because I'm out here earlier than I have been in the past. There are fewer police officers. There are fewer people, and it's because it's still early. This doesn't start to get super packed until the moment just before they shut down. People start showing up in mass around 8 o'clock because they're here to deliberately break curfew and force the police to drive people off with tear gas. And because it's still kind of surprising that that we would see tear gas used on a peaceful protest. Because there's literally nothing I'm looking at right now that is not peaceful. For example, let me show you. The head of the DeKalb SCLC is standing behind me right now.
No peace. No peace. No peace. No peace. When we want it. For what we want. When we want it.
That's all right. So the fellow in the middle was the head of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference for DeKalb County. And he's been coming to protests for 50 years. And is a lifelong pledged against the use of violence in a protest. He's here because this protest is not violent. Those are the basics. I'm actually following the commander of the commander of the military unit that's out here is in front of me right now. And I don't want to catch him off guard with an interview. You really do want to set that sort of thing up, but
Sure.
you may want to talk to him later.
Yeah, and if you see anybody out there that maybe would like to give us a short interview or something, that would be great. Um, Wanted to ask your opinion about the curfews because I watched your live stream last night on a different show, and what I was struck by is like the second it was 9 o'clock, the tear gas came out. It wasn't. It was like the second that curfew was in effect, they started firing. And you talked about how the crowd seems to kind of swell right before curfew. Do you think the curfews are kind of provoking some of this activity? Because that's what it feels like. You know,
Absolutely.
they're drawing a line. Talk about that.
As long as there's a 9 p.m. curfew and military and National Guardsmen in the street, they're going to have a protest. This protest is probably not going to stop until the army goes away, which is nuts, but that's where we are.
What is the
And I don't know what to
logic?
tell you about it.
What is the logic behind it? Because every city is doing a curfew, and I see basically the same thing playing out in city after city. What is the logic there? If it's to de-escalate things, it doesn't really seem to be de-escalating anything. It seems to be making it worse.
I'm not sure I can answer that question. I don't have a good answer for you.
Well,
Hans, what do you
so
think?
I mean, so there are pretty well established riot control, and that's the wrong word in this particular example, but that is what it's called, riot control protocols that are used. And if sometimes allowing a crowd to vent its frustration on things like when curfew is called and when the tear gas comes out, that's different from smashing up stores and breaking property. If you have, as long as you have a controlled conflict in the street, that venting is happening as opposed to what we saw several nights ago. Now, what I'd be curious about, and what I think George was really astute to notice, is that the after the first night when there was glass breaking downtown, things really moved up into Buckhead and moved up into Lenox and that kind of an area. And I'm curious. I just haven't heard as much news about how that sort of protest and where there's a little bit more looting or property damage. How is that being handled at 9 p.m.?
So I've actually blown by Lennox after curfew just to do it, just to see. Um, like the place is crawling with cops right now, and National Guardsmen. Um, and Lennox is going to be shut down pretty much until this is done.
Yep.
So quietly I say, amongst people who are protest oriented, I still have a lot of connections to um, the sort of underground Atlanta protest movement stuff here. And there's a conversation happening about, well, all right, so we hit Lennox, that got people's attention, but what now? Like, how do we sustain this in a way that might actually create systematic changes? Um, the soft targets are being hardened. Um, so there's like, it's not like you're just going to roll up on Lennox tonight, or frankly any other mall within 30 miles of here. Like they've all upped their security and there are cops all over everything. Um, they hit the mall and they hit the luxury stores at the mall for a reason. They did that because they want to devalue conspicuous consumption. They want people who are rich and rich enough to shop at Prada or Gucci to look like everybody else. Like if you're walking around today with a Fendi bag, um, who is to say that you bought it or you stole it? Like suddenly you can't walk around and look rich and not have to question what's going on. It's completely deliberate, um, and it speaks to this issue that's underlying this whole protest, which is black people have become an underclass in the United States in a way where they're no longer full participants in the democracy. They're serfs. They're not slaves, but They're not full citizens, not when we have the kind of inequality that has been getting worse for years and years and years. When no, when all the people who are working at the mall can't actually afford to shop there, the mall starts looking like something that you want to hate. So you hit it. So I'm going on and on at length.
No, that's
Um,
okay. And we'll jump in here. So if you're following us, I'm Dan Wisenhunt. I'm editor and publisher at Decatorish. I'm with Hans Utz and George Chidi. Both of them are columnists for us. Hans is taping from his house where he's secluded because he just got a positive COVID-19 test. He wasn't symptomatic, but he did his civic duty and went out and got tested so he would know. I went out and got tested today as well. If you want to go get tested, Google DeKalb County Board of Public Health or your local Board of Public Health wherever you are. Set up a time and go get tested. George Chidi writes the George on Georgia column. He is in downtown Atlanta for us, walking around, showing us what's going on. George, one of our readers named Dr. Claw, I don't think that's their real name, just wanted to say thank you for your coverage and for wearing a mask. I don't think I would see George without one, or his wife would kill him. And his wife also covers education for us as well. Her name is Sarah. So we are 10 minutes from the hour. We are having a really good discussion. So I wanted to find out if the two of you were amenable to going to 6:15. Is that okay?
I think
Yep.
so, as long as these headphones hold out.
Yeah. Let's if we start having trouble, we can end it. But Hans is working on an editorial about. Well, I'll let you explain it. I want you to kind of give us the synopsis of what you're trying to do because I think it's really important.
Yeah. So a lot of this stemmed from, I mean, obviously everything that's going on out in the world, but Decatur itself, the town of Decatur itself has had recently a couple of incidents where high school students, white high school students, have done some pretty atrociously racist stuff. And, of course, Decatur being, somewhat of a liberal enclave, there's a lot of, gnashing of teeth and rending of clothing about it. And what I wanted to do was to try to get into a little bit of the perspective that, I do not feel that there's anything particularly special or different about the families that raise these kids. That literally, there by the grace of God, could have been almost any white family in Decatur. And if you aren't having the conversations, and if you aren't facing down the nature of privilege and the socialization, the enculturalization, and the repeated training that you have constantly to take advantage of your white privilege and to, bluntly, to be racist. Like, that's not, that isn't a conversation about intent. It's just a conversation of impact. Then it could have been you, right? And so, I think I call myself a racist several times in the column, acknowledging that I haven't always had the hard conversation with my kids, acknowledging that it's easy to slip into the comfort that is provided from the white bubble. I mean, it is really what it is. It is a bubble that I can live in if I wanted to, without having to face any of this stuff. And I could have the comfort for the rest of my life knowing none of my kids are going to have to face it either. I am safe from everything that you're walking on those streets about right now, George. My family is safe from that. And if I allow myself to live in that comfort and don't try to make myself uncomfortable by addressing that, then I'm complicit. I am a complicit individual in every bit of what you're out there trying to protest against. And so I also wanted, I think, Dan, I finished the end of the column is puts a lot of resources out there for you know white parents that want to have these conversations but don't know how, and it's okay if you don't know how. No, we've not been taught. Like
Right.
we've been taught to not talk about it. We've been taught to avoid it. We've been like that's the problem, that we've been taught to not address this.
So George, are you wanting to jump in here?
A little, like, because you're right. Like nobody's taught how to have these conversations, and so they always feel really awkward. Do you know what I mean? Like a
Yep.
little cringy. When, like, I saw a picture earlier today of white people protesting the death of George Floyd, and they were all sort of ceremonially renouncing their white privilege. And they were all on one knee, and it was a picture of a bunch of white people renouncing their white privilege. And it just looked cringy as hell. Like, and I'm looking at it going like, uh, your heart's in the right place. You're doing something that's like valuable, and yet as a black guy, I'm a highly atypical black man, but still, um, I'm looking at it like this is a little silly. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm down with it, but it's a little silly, and I think people are gonna have to accept a little silly, just a little weird, feeling, looking like a little weird. Um, in order for us to get past this awkward moment, like where we're trying to figure out how to communicate, so that we can actually get to a place where we can address all of the racial discord and racial inequality in the country. Like, it's going to be weird, people. It's going
Yeah.
to be real weird.
I mean, I think if there is a performative element of wokeness, I think that white folks can have at times. And I think my fundamental point is if you're trying to communicate to a black person that you aren't racist through your woke behaviors, you're probably missing things. And that may be a little bit of what you're saying looks weird or looks a little silly. And instead have
Yeah.
like kind of the honest conversation saying, I have blinders and I don't even know where my blinders are. Like I've been hidden from them my whole life. There's a ton of stuff out there to help. I mean, Robin DiAngelo, fantastic resource. White Fragility. If you have not read the book, it ought to be de rigueur. Every white person should read that book. There's a ton of other resources. So you want to talk about race? That's a great Ijeoma Olowu. That's a fantastic book that kind of puts into perspective the impact of this this ignorance, and even if it's not an intentional ignorance, and there are a lot of things that we can do, that I can do. Like I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm saying, hey, other people do it. Like this is I'm doing that. I have to do this. That is deeply uncomfortable, hard, and yet that's only symbolic of how necessary it is.
I agree, and I definitely feel you on some of the weirdness of it. My approach to it has always been, I was raised in Lower Alabama, and I had to come to Atlanta to realize how whack that place really is in terms of equality. And I moved to Atlanta and I was like, oh, there's a black middle class here. I've never seen such because it doesn't exist in Alabama. If it does, it's very on the margins. So my parents were of that generation of segregation was what they grew up with, and they went to college, and I think they did their best. I don't think that they were given the proper tools to do better. They weren't expected to do better. They had no reason to do better. It wasn't that way. And it was hard owning up to the attitudes and ideas and mistakes that I've. It was hard because you have to admit that you're part of the problem. And it was interesting to me to see sort of in real time with the George Floyd thing where at first, everyone in America was like, "Oh, this is terrible. This is horrible. This shouldn't have happened. This cop needs to be prosecuted." Well, then these protests happened, and suddenly that opinion started to diverge a little bit. And now you had, well, what happened to George Floyd was bad, and we should do something about it. And this other side of the country is going, well, it was bad, but let's not get too crazy, because when black people start marching in the streets and start demanding more equality, then that is also a demand for white people to admit their complicity in not giving them that equality, right? So I think that's something that, honestly, black people have been putting up with bullshit for a long time, and they've been about as graceful and patient as I think they could reasonably be. And the time for asking black people to fix this shit is over. That's done. White people need to fix this. This is the problem that they created. Black people need to be involved. They need to have their space. It needs to be protected. But the discussions about how to end racism in our communities need to be led by people like Hans, in the communities. And we need to stop. What I'm hearing from the black community and our black readers is that they're tired. They're trying to process all of this grief, and we're coming to them and asking them to absolve us of our sins. That's not their job right now.
I mean, we're
our job.
totally putting the emotional burden of the work
Right.
back on the,
Right.
the,
They've
the
already
black
got enough
people.
of it. So one thing I did in I'm with Hans. I'm not into this performative wokeness sort of thing. I prefer to let my actions speak and hope that that's enough. But I have engaged a consultant who's going to help us draw up new editorial policies that I hope going forward are going to do things to promote equity within our publication. I mean, I feel like I've always been somewhat mindful of that, but I'm going to make sure, damn sure, that the policies that I'm following are the right policies and are doing the job that I need them to do to make our coverage more equitable, but also not perpetuate the racist policing practices that put us into our current situation in the first place. So I'm not asking for a pat on the back or anything, but I'm just using that as an example to say, these are the kinds of things that we need to start doing right now to get right and get on the right side of this.
I'm about to lose you, I think, because my cell phone's at 5%.
Okay.
I just want you to know, like, this may sound strange, but I've come from some privilege, believe it or not. Black guy here, but I'm biracial. Grew up in the middle of Massachusetts. I was like that one black kid in school, and I'm not gonna lie. It took me moving to Atlanta to figure out just how whack where I was coming from was too. Like, it's the irony is that I think places like Atlanta are how we survive all of this. I think the solution to like all of these ills that we're talking about, if it's going to be found someplace, I think it's going to be found here. I think it's going to be found someplace right here. If we figure out how to have these conversations and make this society work, then we're the example for everybody else.
Yep.
And it's just something to think about.
Well,
I couldn't agree more with that assessment of Atlanta. Right. I lived for a couple years in San Francisco, and San Francisco has this mythology about itself, about how tolerant and open and liberal and broad-minded and all of this. And I remember sitting in the city of San Francisco looking at it and saying, and this is before everybody had to move out of Oakland because nobody could afford to live in Oakland either, right? I mean, this is pre all the tech money. But I mean, I remember sitting in San Francisco and being like, the sharpest color line in the United States of America is the San Francisco Bay. Like, how can you possibly say that this place doesn't have a problem? You're not even aware of it, right? I mean, it was that was the perspective I carried into San Francisco after having lived in Atlanta, right? So, I mean, Atlanta is where I agree that the space and the capacity of these conversations can happen. So what that's not for us to pat ourselves on the back. That's a call to action. That means that we then have to have the conversations. We have to do the work, and it's on us.
And that's a great place to, I think, wrap it up because George is about to lose power.
Yeah, I'm at 2%.
George, if you are free, we hope you can join us on Friday at 6. That's when our next show is. Hans, same for you. If you're free, I'd like to pick this discussion back up on Friday. Thank you both very much. If you're tuning in, this is the Decatur's Twitch show with Hans Utz and George Chidi. George is in downtown Atlanta. If you missed this, please go back and watch the video. It's been a great discussion. Hans, we're going to be thinking about you. You look like you're fine. We're going to keep hoping it stays that way. I will let everybody know what my COVID test result was when I get it. And if you are watching us now and you want to keep watching us, give us a follow on Twitch. Join us this Friday at 6, and we're going to try to do this every Wednesday and Friday at 6 o'clock on our Twitch channel. So thank you all so much. Thank you all for joining us. I hope you found it informative and entertaining, and we will talk to you again next Friday. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.
Bye.